Folks, like Mark said, my name is Matt Hillen. I'm with the Illinois Department of Commerce Office of Employment and Training. I have with me today to help present John Barr, who is our Office of Employment and Training Fiscal Manager. He'll be chiming in on some of the issues relating to procurement and fiscal operations. I also have as a special guest with us today the Honorable Doug Morton of the Illinois Department of Human Services, who will be chiming in to help talk about questions around full inclusion models and programs seeking to serve individuals with disabilities. Always great to have Doug with us. So with that, I would say ask questions in the chat pod. I would also encourage you, those of you who have visited the Youth 2016 site, to enter questions in the FAQ, questions that are answered here today and questions that we don't have time to get to today will all be filled into the FAQ and answered there as well. Again, for those of you who have not seen the site, and I don't know how you could have not seen the site by now, but it's illinoisworknet.com/youth2016. It's where we're keeping all of the RFA and application materials and supporting materials and the FAQ as well. We'll also post information about future information sessions based on your input at the end of the session today. So ask your questions. We'll try to address some of them as we go along, but likely with the amount of information that we have to get through, we'll try to save those for the end. We want to make sure that on this first information session that we get through all of the information around the RFA and around reporting and things like that before we get into FAQ stuff. So if we're able, we'll address them as we go, but most likely questions will be addressed at the end. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and dive right into the application, or to the PowerPoint, and we'll talk first about goals and objectives. The RFA was created as a response and as a recommendation of the Illinois Workforce Investment Board, or Illinois Workforce Innovation Board, I'm sorry, our state workforce board, who created a task force surrounding issues dealing with youth that are served in the workforce system. We had 3 tasks on that task force. We wanted to first get a baseline of who the youth in Illinois are, what programs they are currently being served by, and then what our prescription was in addressing the issues that youth face in Illinois today when it comes to employment, secondary and post-secondary education, and their connection to career tracks. So this RFA is to fund specifically to fund pilot programs that address the program criteria and the recommendations that youth task force felt necessary. Typical grants will be between 12 and 18 months. The applications are due by May 2nd. Applications received after that date will be reviewed based on whether or not there are funds left available after the decisions from the applications that were timely after those funding decisions are made. Grant awards will not generally exceed $500,000. Blending and braiding of funds is required. This is critical. The project, one of the biggest findings of the task force was that programs are more sustainable and more effective when there is co-investment from business partners, and that is a critical component that we want to see out of these programs. The principles, the guiding principles of the RFA are those, are basically the categories that the task force found to be critical criteria in creating Youth Career Pathways programs. The task force looked at a lot of national and state level models that have found success in creating career pathways for youth. They found 10 criteria to be absolutely critical. Those are around partnerships, business engagement, as we already started to discuss, finding a mechanism for guiding youth to credentials or post-secondary access, making sure that programs are sector-based and that those sectors are the sectors that are growth sectors, and that the occupations that are targeted are growth occupations. Work-based learning is critical, so having that connection to work in the process of training is absolutely critical. The individual supports, and what we mean by individual supports is not just your typical soft skills, but looking in a holistic way at what supports surround an individual youth and making sure that you're addressing the youth in a circumspect manner and finding out what the key supports are in that youth's life that will create a better opportunity for success. Contextualizing learning, so particularly you see this in things like bridge programs where you're targeting an occupation before you design the training, so making sure that everything that you're doing with the kid is driving towards a career, and making sure that your program is geared towards that. Measuring results and continuous improvement. So this plays into the last piece, which is sustainability. Making sure that you have a mechanism that you're looking at the data that will determine success for a program, that you are analyzing it in a way that helps you to improve that program cohort over cohort, year over year, and that finally you have a plan to sustain the program with both funding and programmatically as well. Chelsea, I'm having a tough time with my access. It keeps flopping in and out, so if I'm unable to flip a slide, I'm going to ask you to. I am able to now. Again, the programs need to be sector-based, and for more information on the key sectors in Illinois, you can visit illinoispathways.com. That is also listed as a resource and a link on the website that we have as a landing site for the Youth RFA. Let's talk about applicants. Applicants can come from any of the categories that you see listed here. We wanted to open this up to as many people as possible. And again, I'd like to reiterate for those of you who may not have taken much of a look at the website or the RFA, that we are involving all of the core WIOA partners in this effort. We're a unified team in this, and we want to make sure that we get a broad list of contributors, a list of applicants. We did distribute to all of the provider networks in all of the core partners networks. We are looking at this as something that we want to drive our shared vision under the Unified State Plan and drive what we all see as priorities for career pathways for youth. So something to keep in mind. Local workforce innovation areas or a partnership with a local workforce innovation area is a necessary component to this, because there is a regional planning process around the state that plays off of the Unified State Plan between the core agencies under WIOA, and those regional plans really key in on what the key sectors are, what the key jobs are, the labor market planning in each area. We want to make sure that those regional plans are being supported, so we we want to make sure that if you are an employer partner, if you are a business, if you are a provider that has not been historically connected to the workforce system, that you are partnering with the workforce system to make sure that there's a plan for sustainability and that there's a plan to integrate services and it supports those regional plans. Chelsea, please flip the slide. So we'll move on to eligible participants, and you can flip the slide again. The eligible participants are youth ages 16 to 24 that meet the eligibility requirements of WIOA. Those of you who are not traditional workforce system providers will want to do a little bit of research into what that means. But basically, if a youth is out of school, that basically means that the individual is not attending any school and has an additional barrier, and those barriers, there's a few categories of those barriers that you'll want to take a look at. We do have an emphasis on opportunity youth for this, and this is something that that's a subpopulation of youth that the task force found was absolutely critical to address. And opportunity youth, that's a term that's kind of a term of art right now for young people who are not in school and simultaneously not working. So they're disconnected from both the labor market and education at the same time. We also want to put an emphasis on priority populations, and we'll look a little bit at that later and kind of list out for you some ideas of what we address with that. Please flip the slide. The WIOA spending requirement is something that we have to pay attention to, and we wanted to share this with you. Under the law, the funds that the Department of Commerce is leveraging for this program are funds that are subject to the state and local youth funding requirements under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Those requirements are that with state and local Title I dollars, we spend 75% of our funding on out-of-school youth, and which limits us to no more than 25% for in-school youth. So depending on the kind of program that you are going, or the type of population that you're going to be addressing in your application, please keep that in mind because we will have to adhere to those regulations as we move forward in awarding grants. Please flip the slide. Priority populations. This kind of goes back into, what I talked about with the emphasis on opportunity youth. We also want to make sure that we're addressing some of the priority populations of youth that have additional barriers. So talking about youth that are served under the Social Security Act Title 4D, which deals with the child support system, cooperative extension programs, things like the agricultural programs run by the University of Illinois Extension, things like 4-H, things like that. Programs carried out for individuals with disabilities, making sure that that individuals with disabilities in the population that you're targeting are being addressed. Out-of-school youth in the juvenile justice system or in the child welfare or foster care system for priority populations for us. Adult education and literacy activities, digital literacy and financial literacy activities, and ex-offenders re-entering the workforce, which would obviously play back in partially to the juvenile justice system, but you may get adult offenders as well at the top of that age range in the 16 to 24. Let's talk about innovative pilot programs, and this is another section of the RFA. If you can notice a pattern, I'm kind of walking through the RFA to kind of try and better explain it. Program criteria, again, need to adhere to the recommendations of the task force and what they felt were critical program criteria for career pathways, that being the vision points that we talked about earlier. We do want to make sure that, and you can flip the slide, we do want to make sure that these programs support regional planning, and as I said before, so that you're building a partnership with the regional partners, which include all of the core partners under WIOA, in each of the economic development regions, and which is what drove the question that we asked at the top of the webinar. We want to make sure that the training credits that you're targeting are both portable and stackable and allow participants to accelerate through the program. And what we mean by that is we want to make sure that if you're giving a youth a work experience and that work experience doesn't pan out, that money wasn't spent for naught, and that individual has something to build on and get that next job. So we want to make sure that the training that you're doing is industry recognized, not employer recognized, but industry recognized. We want to make sure that applicants have developed a clearly articulated plan and that they're thinking about the future and continuous improvement and sustainability. Innovative approaches. We talked about this a little bit in the RFA, but a few of the models that we've seen, that we saw through the task force, both nationwide and at the state level, that were really effective, utilize things like effective business intermediaries, and basically that are kind of a link to a set of employers, either regionally or a set of employers that are connected in another way, and using them as kind of the bridge to employers and helping the employers see how your program fits the bottom line. Activities to improve linkages between workforce partners would also be a great approach. So making sure that what you're doing is driving the regional partnerships forward and making the system stronger in a sustainable way. Business services and strategies that better engage employers in workforce investment activities. So again, making sure that the business's bottom line is being addressed and giving a good model that can be replicated and sustained. Industry or sector partnerships is kind of another play on that, and regional projects and innovative strategies that meet the talent pipeline needs of business is yet another way that we want to see folks engaging business. Under WIOA, our mission is to develop business-driven solutions for the state of Illinois economy. So we do want to make sure that business is involved in these applications. We want to also make sure that that you can go ahead and flip the slide. We want to also make sure that there is when we're dealing with individuals with disabilities, that folks are examining the possibility of using full inclusion models, which is basically drives at Illinois' commitment as what's called an employment first state. For those of you who don't know what employment first is, it's a national movement to make sure that when individuals with disabilities are seeking services, that employment is the first consideration, and that not only employment but inclusive, integrated employment in the general workforce is a priority. Full inclusion models drive at that and make sure that individuals with disabilities are addressed in the course of a program, of a training, of employment, and are fully integrated into the workforce or into the classroom. Evidence-based programming. Those of you on the academic side are definitely familiar with this, and evidence-based programming that are studied and proven models to address employment, to address youth, those are welcome in applications as well, and looking at ways that we can integrate those into what we do in the workforce system. We'll talk a little bit about reporting. The reporting requirements for these grants are around both programmatic and fiscal issues. We want to make sure that for those of you who have not received a grant from the department before, that you're making quarterly programmatic progress, and we will ask for specific information relating to participation and progress by the youth. We will ask for fiscal reporting that tracks at the participant level the spending on things like wages, on other services that you're providing. John, do you want to add anything here?
No, yeah, I think for the local workforce areas, we'll request your typical quarterly reports, which includes a trial balance for the funds.
We also want to make sure that that all of the participant information is being tracked, and we will use a system for that, either through partnership through the Illinois Workforce Development System, which is our state information management system, or we will use a system through Illinois WorkNet or other reporting process for that. There may be additional reports that are deemed necessary by the grantor, and we reserve that right. And there's also a possibility that formal evaluation of projects that we want to look at sustaining will be required, and we will address that with grantees as negotiations progress. Memoranda of understanding, this is something that's always addressed whenever an RFA goes out. We want to make sure that folks who are not a local workforce innovation area that apply for this grant have the understanding with the local workforce innovation area that that all of these reporting requirements that are required are going to be done in partnership with the LWIA. So you do have to have an understanding and seek agreement with your local workforce innovation area. This also speaks to the support for regional planning that we talked about. The LWIAs are working on finalizing their regional plans, which include their focus on key sectors. They're looking at a lot of data right now and making sure that and making sure that these projects support that effort is a priority for the core partners that have put this RFA before you.
Hey, Matt.
Go ahead, Mark.
We're getting a little reverb. I didn't know if you wanted to address any of the questions since you're just speaking of the MOU. If you wanted to speak, there was one question asking for clarification. Can a business investment fund contribution be in kind if the contribution is clearly articulated in an MOU?
Yeah, I think we'll get to some of that in the slides, Mark. This is John
Okay.
Barr. So the answer is yes, we will accept in kind, but we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah, we're going to speak directly to the question about leveraged in-kind and matching funds.
Oh, there you go.
Right, I believe we're going to do it right now.
On cue. There you go. Beautiful. We're going to now talk about some, just basics around the federal grant funds. These are Federal Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funds. So they must meet all of the requirements of the uniform administrative requirements, as well as the Department of Labor standards, including the tests of allowability. They must be necessary. And in the next couple of slides, we're going to go over some of those basic principles. I'm not going to go over, a ton of detail. There is a lot of information on this out there, and we'd be happy to send that to you as far as the uniform administrative guidance. But a couple of highlights: the costs must be reasonable. It can't exceed what you would normally pay, so a prudent person, right? So the fair market value, you act with prudence, you follow your established policies and procedures, follow sound business practices. Practical nature, is this item or service required to be included as part of the overall project? Do you have the capacity to utilize what you're proposing to purchase? Did I pay a fair rate? If the Chicago Tribune called you up, could you defend the cost? So these are just some basic considerations. Next slide, please. Now I want to talk about matching and leverage funds. So the Uniform Administrative Guidance provides kind of the basics around this, and I would point and that's what will govern kind of the categorization of costs here. Matching costs are the portion of the projects that are not paid by federal funds and meet the following conditions. They are non-federal funds to support the grant objectives. They must be spent on allowable grant activities. They must be verifiable in recipient records. They can't be used to support another federally funded program. They must be, again, must meet the necessary, reasonable, and allowability requirements. They must be included in an allowed line item within your budget, and they have to conform to other any of the requirements under the Uniform Administrative Guidance. Differences: leverage funds essentially are the other program funds, which could include your other federal program costs that don't tip, that are excluded in that requirement where you can't match federal for federal, right? So that's where I see a lot of the applicability there. And so it's any resources. And technically, leveraged funds aren't specifically defined by the uniform regs, but the Department of Labor has come out with a definition that it's all resources used by the grantee to support grant activity and outcomes, whether the resources meet the standards applied to match or not. So it's any other any other resources that you're throwing at the project, but you must, again, on leveraged and matching funds, they have to meet the tests for necessary, reasonable, and allowable, and you must be able to track those. And so, we'll work with you as you develop your budgets and as we develop the final grants as how those matching funds are ultimately categorized. As Matt mentioned, matching funds or leveraged funds are required, and that's part of the, it's a requirement, but it's also an evaluation criteria. So the more you can leverage, the better your proposal will be. So those are kind of the basics around the financial management, and as we mentioned, those reports our quarterly reports are provided, but we also require that grantees report their costs on a monthly basis in our electronic grants reporting system. And once you apply for funds and get to that next stage of negotiations, we'd be happy to provide those who aren't familiar with our accounting systems and grant management systems with additional detail. Those are information sessions in and of themselves. So rest assured, there's a lot of information that is out there, and we will walk you through as applicable.
There was a question, Don, do leveraged funds encompass in-kind contributions?
Yes. I mean, technically, they do. I mean, you're basically when, I guess it depends on how you use the terminology. Leveraged, the total leveraged can include the strict definition of match, but also those funds that don't fall under the strict definition of match. So, like I said, most of those, most of the funding under leveraged resources is going to fall under, other federal funds that you're committing to the objectives of the project.
Great. So moving on, we'll talk a little bit, as we have questions, we'll talk a little bit more, in detail about the fiscal side at the end if there are additional questions there. Again, WIOA is a reimbursement-based program, and you will be reimbursed based on your established performance factors and your progress toward those. Speaking of which, your performance, we will just kind of pop up the application page. Actually, this is directly from our general DCEO application, so you'll know exactly what we're talking about. The performance indicators that we put up there are those primarily with a couple of things added. Those are the ones that we deal with under WIOA for youth. We want to know which of these categories apply to your project that you're proposing, and please answer all that apply. If there are additional metrics that you feel we need to know in evaluating your application, you are welcome to add those below the ones that we have here. When it comes to monitoring, I don't know, John, do you want to handle this piece as well?
Sure. So again, under the new administrative guidelines, all grants will receive a pre-award review by our fiscal monitoring team, and that will be based on the information you provide in your application. We may require some additional information from you even when the applications are going through the evaluation process. So that may be a follow-up point that we'll come back with you. I would also point out that these funds or these grants will be monitored. If the grantees are local workforce areas, we most likely will monitor those as part of your annual review, although there may be some additional programmatic monitoring. But all grants will be formally monitored. We will look at a financial review as well as a programmatic review. And that will happen through the life of the grant at least once, as well as technical assistance at the front end, and most of that will be provided by the program staff. Next slide.
Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about the critical criteria for selection. We want to make sure, again, and I know that we've said this 3 or 4 times, but we want to make sure that you're fulfilling the requirements of the RFA and that you are hewing your application to those guiding principles that the task force boiled down, the 10 vision elements or the guiding principles of the RFA. They're in the actual task force report, which is posted on the Youth 2016 site. There are a series of questions, and I believe that we also listed a truncated version of these questions in the back of the RFA as well, just to kind of hammer that home. But there's a very expansive set of questions that can kind of guide the questions that you should be asking about your RFA or about your application, and I believe it starts on page 5 of the Youth Task Force report. And there was a question, John, about the pre-award survey, and they asked if it's similar to the OJT pre-award survey, and I believe the answer to that is no.
Correct.
And that is because
it's something completely different. I mean, it's a risk assessment that is required by the Uniform Administrative Guidance. So it's something that we do for all of our federal awards, and many times our grantees don't see that process. But as I mentioned, we may need some additional information to complete that review. The purpose is to identify grantees that may be more risky, and if there are certain risk factors, we would include additional conditions to the grants.
And that speaks directly to our second bullet point in the criteria for selection here, which is demonstrated capacity to manage the grant. We want to see grant history, things like that. We want to see applicants that have a robust employer relationships, that are coordinating with the partners and driving those regional plans and coordinating with their local workforce boards. We want to see outcomes that are aligned with the RFA, address the priority populations, quality and detail of the work plan, and reasonable budget in relationship to the activities. The budget is something that's definitely key. We want to make sure that there's a clear and concise description, that it's appropriate and reasonable, as John already covered. And again, the kind of soft cap that we have on these budgets is $500,000. This is the section in the application from the budget. You want to make sure that you're breaking your budget down into the line items that are required. The line items that we have listed there are those that we'll use for these applications. And you not only need to make sure that all of that math adds up as you break out those line items, but that in the budget narrative, which follows the budget in the application, that you're explaining how those things break out, that you're kind of showing your math. And this is something that I mentioned because I see it happen a lot when we put out big RFAs and we get a lot of applications back. Make sure that those two budgets that you have in your detailed budget narratives, because I understand in the application process you're doing a lot of work, you're massaging this and that and this and that, and a lot of times grantees will end up with a little bit of math on your budget narrative that doesn't match your budget or vice versa. So just make sure that you double check your math a couple of times and that everything adds up and that it matches between your narrative and your budget. Next slide, please. Be sure that you respond to all elements of the RFA, that you're clear, concise, and timely. There was a question about timeliness. Pam Ferlin, I know you asked a question about that. This is a project that requires a great deal of thought. You asked a question as to whether an application now is a better way to, an application now that's less developed is better or worse than an application that comes after May 2 and is more fully developed. It's unfortunately not a question that I can particularly answer for you. I would say that you're going to want to make sure that you've thought out, the fidelity to the RFA and that you've thought out the fiscal and sustainability pieces, and that, in order to ensure consideration, because projects received after May 2 will only be received if there are funds remaining, will only be evaluated, if there are funds remaining, so that you're putting something forward to us. Again, if funds remain afterwards, we may come back to grantees and say, we're going to consider another round under this RFA. But again, we can't guarantee that for folks that don't meet the deadline. We wanted to make sure that these projects are out in time to support the regional plans and to support the efforts that we're all putting forward, going forward into full WIOA implementation next year. We understand that there's a great deal of thought that goes into this, but we feel that it really plays into the regional planning that the local workforce innovation areas are doing right now, and that in partnership, brings forward a capacity in the system for those heavier lifts. Please flip the slide. The information, as we stated, is online. All of this information is online. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted online at illinoisworknet.com/youth2016. The RFA materials, FAQ, additional resources like the Youth Task Force report so that you can see exactly what we base this on and the recommendations that we base this on. All of that information is going to be there. As additional information sessions are planned, we will post those there as well. You can flip the slide. This is my contact information. You can reach me by email at matthew.hillen@illinois.gov. I try to get back to you as quickly as I possibly can, either via phone or email. Also, as you're asking me questions, if you want to post those on the FAQ on the website we'd be very grateful because it saves us from posting them before we answer them. We're automatically notified when you post questions on the FAQ, and we will answer those in turn. All of the questions that you post here today in the chat box, we will try to answer as well. I wanted to, Chelsea just added that to the chat box as well, the link to the website. So let's talk about some questions now. I do want to address a few things that we've already received. I'd like to talk about a few topics that we've already received. We talked about the timelines and the project length. We want to make sure that at the end of these programs that there is an outcome that is a career pathway outcome, which is either unsubsidized placement in jobs. We want to see kids getting jobs in the fields that they're being trained in. We want to make sure that if they are not in unsubsidized placement, that there is a plan for their career, meaning that there is a track for post-secondary success towards additional credentials on their career path that your program has started them on. We've got a question we've received a few questions on business engagement, and I'd like to address Carolyn King's question that she asked, can business investment funds contributions be in kind? And I believe that we addressed that already, right?
Yeah, they can, but you need to have documentation if you're going to count them as a full-on matching cost or a leverage cost. You need to make sure that they meet all of the criteria for reasonable, allowable, and that they're documented.
And Mark Lohman's question around whether or not private funding could come from not-for-profit corporations or organizations, and that's yes. If those are private agencies, then yes, it could. What we want to make sure is that those funds that are being matched or leveraged, that those are funds that are coming from business, the businesses that are partnering to hire, employ, train on the job. That's the point of that match. I don't believe you've got a pot of questions here up for me, Chelsea, and I don't believe that I can roll through. Must the training have college credit associated with it to be considered portable and stackable? What we want to see is that you're putting forward an application that keeps youth on a career track. The credential questions, I would defer to what is required under performance, the performance requirements for the credentialing measure for youth in under WIOA, which Mark Burgess, can you address that specifically?
Can you repeat exactly what you want me to ask on that or answer on that?
Well, the question was, must the training have college credit associated with it to be considered portable and stackable?
No, I would think the way we look at that
generally is no, but when they're talking about the performance and the ways that they hit the performance measures for the LWIA, I think those are kind of two different questions.
Obviously, all of our training should be leading to some kind of a credential certification or a college degree of whether it be associates, bachelor's, et cetera. I think where you're looking at the stackable part of that is always leaning to, if you are training in something that doesn't meet that definition, so say you're getting a GED certification, you're getting that because you're leaning them towards another training program. Otherwise, the adult education program, handles just the GED if that's all an individual wants to receive and not go into training supported by WIOA dollars. So I think as long as, it's leading to what we recognize as a certification or degree or other type of documentation like that, then it's good training. So their plan must, include an outline of how that's meeting that goal.
Okay, there's a question on the cooperative extension, that priority population. Would participants in this opportunity be required to be 16 to 24 years old? And the answer is yes. We're using WIOA funds for this, and youth are defined under WIOA as 16 to 24. Can we provide more information of what is expected in response to the evidence-based and other WIOA programming success? Kind of a tough question. We'll try to post some links to resources that define evidence-based programs so that you can kind of clarify that in your own research as you address your application. Do training programs have to be on the WIA eligible provider list? Again, we are using Title I funds, which does force us to adhere to our Title I regulations, so I believe the answer to that would be yes as well.
What you need to be aware of on that is that there are certain training program types that are exempt from our policy on utilizing the eligible training provider, or the demand occupation list and eligible training provider list. So you just follow all of that as far as what's exempted in the policy.
I believe that we've answered a lot of these. Given that, I've received a few questions about the page limit in the applications. Again, we worded it very specifically that page limit for the technical proposal will typically be 7 pages. We know that necessarily, given the fact that we do have a bureaucratic process that we're dealing with, because we are dealing with federal dollars with a lot of oversight, that there is going to be a little bit of repetition in the way that you all apply for dollars. We are not enforcing a page limit on this. We do ask, though, for the sake of our reviewers, because we do expect to get a lot of applications, we do ask that you are, the term that I continue to use is efficient, that you're efficient in how you describe your application, your program in a very complete way, but that you are also efficient in the language that you use, so that we can manage the process to get these things turned around and get awards made. Can startup funding be requested at the beginning? I think that, John, you might want to go ahead and address this piece.
Yeah, costs are provided on a reimbursement basis, but generally for these grants, there are provided on a cost reimbursement basis. There may be some circumstances where small advance may be available, but we would have to deal with that on a case-by-case basis. But I would plan for a reimbursement basis only.
Matt and John, there are quite a few more questions. I didn't know if you were wanting to address every one of these, or if you want to add some of these just to the FAQ and then the subsequent Q&A that will be developed and put on the site. I don't know if you can see those on the right-hand side. Chelsea's been helping put those. Those that are still in black are available for answering, or if you want.
I think in order to get out on time, to get out by 11, I think that we need to go ahead and put up the final poll questions, which are really, we wanted to make sure that we get folks' input on what we need as far as additional information sessions. So we will answer all the questions that are submitted in the chat pod. As Mark said, we'll answer those in the FAQs as soon as we possibly can. But we did want to make sure that we got input on these poll questions. If you all could answer these, that will give us the input that we need to move forward in planning and making sure that we're getting you enough information to apply. We want to know first, following this discussion, what's your level of interest in the RFA? That will tell me particularly, whether listening to me talk makes you more or less likely to take advantage of the workforce system. So make sure that you keep my feelings in mind there. But we also want to know what you feel you need in addition to the information that you received here today in order to apply. If you still intend to apply, do you have the information? Do you need additional webinars, or do you need in-person events? I think that we could crank out a lot more webinars than we could do in-person events. But and it seems like that's the way that most people want to handle it. So I don't think that we need to go into in-person event locations. So given the responses that we've gotten right now, we will make sure that we post simultaneously a set of webinars so that we can make sure that folks on the timeline that we have remaining, that we can crank out a few more webinars and address more questions, especially, and we'll try to, we're going to get the FAQ out prior to that, obviously, but when we announce that we've got the FAQ questions answered, we will also announce a series of webinars to make ourselves available to address any remaining issues, and that folks will have several opportunities to fit it into their schedule.
We will, we'll make those announcements probably through Christy Jones, just because that's who we're used to using for our webinars, and she has the master list of email contacts. It's not necessarily that it will be next week's WIOA Wednesday webinar session. We did have another topic we were discussing about utilizing that time for, but it could be that one. We might make our decision after we see the need for it, or it may be earlier in the week. Is that correct, Matt?
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely going to be no later than next Wednesday. I would say very likely earlier. I wanted to make sure that this was the route that folks wanted to go before we put out those dates and times. But like I said, there will be more than one. We'll definitely have more than one session announced so that folks, we know that folks have schedules and that some of those schedules are already set, so we're going to make sure that we give you more than one opportunity to fit this in. One thing that, I kind of lost my train of thought here, I apologize. Wanted to make sure that you also check the Youth 2016 website for this information, because in addition to Christy sending these things out via the WIOA Wednesday webinar list, we're also going to be posting this information on the site, so check back to see that and any additional support information that's been suggested that we post on the site as well. There are some links up there already talking about some of the priority populations. There's data up there. We want to make sure that folks know where the youth in need are and have the resources to serve them and build a strong application. So again, we thank you for your time. We thank you a great deal for your time, and look forward to a big stack of very good applications. We will address any questions that are submitted here and in the FAQ on the website in due time, and announce as many extra sessions as we feel we need to move forward. Thanks, folks.
Okay, thank you. And again, we'll get that information out. We will also post it on the website to make sure everyone's kept up to date, especially for a lot of the providers here that probably aren't on our email distribution list. Please forward these on to anyone else that you know might be interested in continuing to participate and get the information necessary to make a complete application. Thank you, everyone.